Hello and a very warm welcome to VCC TV. Today with me is a very special guest. I have with me Mr. P.N. Vijay, who's a former investment banker and a BJP spokesperson. Thank you, Mr. Vijay. Thank you for talking to us. My first question to you is that there is a lot of criticism coming post budget in terms of it's very political budget in its outlook, and the government has kind of really stuck to the political messaging. How would you react to that?
Well, I wouldn't agree with that if by political, it's surely not a populist budget. Nobody has used that, even the critics. If you say it's a political budget, the reference is obviously to the huge push being given to the rural sector. And the fact that it's a huge population and that has the capacity to vote and this sort of thing. But if you look at it objectively, I feel that the rural sector is really passing through a distress situation, mainly because of two bad monsoons. The deficits have been very large, and so it needs correction. Rural wages have remained stagnant, and it is just not enough using the minimum support price mechanism because it's just not adequate. So what this budget has tried to do is to reach out in many ways. In terms of numbers, about 96,000 crores of money is being pumped into the rural system by way of irrigation projects, by way of rural roads and so on. Apart from that, some imaginative steps are being taken to provide gas connection and replace the age-old chulas, provide electrification and provide broadband connectivity at low cost. So surely it is popular in the sense that a huge thrust, an unprecedented thrust is being done on the rural economy. But at this point in time, few will argue about the need for that.
Interesting. So like you mentioned, there are huge outlays being done on Manrega and some of these areas. You think this is primarily being done to keep the upcoming elections, on the annual, it's somewhere that is on the back of the mind sort of playing out. It's definitely the budget which the opposition can't oppose much.
Yes, the opposition is finding it very difficult to, apart from criticizing it in general terms, opposing it as much. Well, to the extent that most of the states in India have a rural bias, except New Delhi perhaps. And it's a fact of life, there are going to be 4 major elections next 12 months. Any action done by the government would have an impact on elections. Tamil Nadu, that way, is a fairly urbanized state. Assam is rural, West Bengal is rural, and Uttar Pradesh is clearly rural. So I won't deny that there is always at the back of the mind for any political party in a democracy some effort taken to take the people along. So to that extent, we would say that we are killing 2 birds with 1 stone.
Absolutely. So moving forward in terms of the fiscal roadmap, it looks like the government said that they want to stick to this fiscal roadmap of 3 to 3.5%. You think they are sort of on road to do that and they can really do this?
Well, so far they have. I would say even the UPA government, even when the oil was 100 plus, they stuck to their roadmap. And the last 2 years, the BJP government has stuck to the roadmap. 3.9 is going to be quite easy. 3.5, many people in the media and economists in discussions were questioning the need to stick to that. They said there is so much of lack of demand in the system and private sector is not investing, so government should go out of its way to spend money. But government has obviously taken the view, and I think rightly, that some amount of credibility with the investment community is extremely important. Otherwise, if you keep shifting the goalpost, that's going to have a very bad impact on investment flows. And secondly, what would happen is that if you increased government borrowing and government spending, the bond markets, which have been extremely jittery over the last 6 months, the bottom may fall out, and you will again have an interest rate increases coming up. So I think it's judicious monetary tactic also to keep the fiscal thing down. And let's admit we have been lucky. Right from the last 1.5 years, oil prices are at unprecedented lows, which gives a tremendous amount of fiscal space. So it's lucky that on one side you're making these huge investments in infrastructure, rural economy, and still you're not busting the fisc. Let's hope that the oil prices remain low.
So sort of, what do you think, how as a foreign, you have been an investment banker earlier, how you think will the foreign institutional investor sort of look at this budget?
Well, foreign institutional investor, for him, of course, the budget is only one of the many criteria. He is very much global in his outlook. He has choices. So far, he has been faithful to India as compared to other emerging markets. But having said that, I think there are two very major things, announcements, which I would almost call Big Bang, which are sort of not two or three things, I would say, which I would say would be biggish bang. One is there is a VDIS scheme for black money here. You'd see that the government has come out and said in the next 3-4 months you can bring in loads of cash and say it's your income. We are not going to go after you. No prosecution. Pay an extra
45%.
tax. Pay an extra tax because in these types of cases the penalties and prosecution are much higher than that. So you pay an extra thing. No questions asked. So this is
It's
clear.
positive, you think?
I mean, it's a big
For
bang.
certain quarters.
It's a big bang. Let's admit it. I mean, ask your question. It's a subjective answer. We have tried so hard to get at black money. We've had a scheme with abroad that had a mixed reaction. So I think there's a good effort. I think it's better in an overall point of view that money gets into the system, taxed at a fairly high level, and then we get stricter. So I would say it's positive. There is a moral hazard, of course, that people will stop paying tax and hope for more schemes to come. But then on the net, I feel it's positive. Second is, for the first time, after a long time in a budget, I think after the 2004 budget, we are talking about strategic disinvestment. That is a sale of assets of public sector units. They're being fast-tracked. The CPSCs are being put under the Niti Aayog scrutiny, and they're going to come up, which is the usual. Last time also they did that. So, at about 17,000 crores is being assumed, which is again a great thing, which one normally would call a big bang.
Thing.
Yeah, I mean selling of the crown jewels, as you would say. The third, I think, is government is first time putting on the drawing board a plan to reduce its holding in public sector banks below 49%. That's a very big thing. In monetary terms, yes, because some people would say that the 25,000 crores which have been allocated for PSU capitalization is inadequate. I agree. But if you're able to offer shares to the public or to other people and get your holding down, that could be a huge thing. And apart from increasing the capital, we have seen that when you bring the capital down to 49%, you're out of CAG, you're out of many things, you have freedom in hiring your top personnel, in paying them, you're anyway listed. So we are almost there in terms of privatization of banks. So these three things, one is a VDIS, the other is public sector strategic investment likely to happen, and the third is a clear roadmap for bringing down public sector, government's holding in public sector are, I think, not the run-of-the-mill revenue expenditure type of things. These are, I would say, quite aggressive forms of the government has taken.
So what would you think would be the areas that the government sort of has tend to take in a lot of a very measured view and could have taken a more aggressive view on those areas? Household seems to be one.
Clearly, I think among the different constituencies, there is a feeling of, I wouldn't say unhappiness, but disappointment. Unhappiness in this country comes when you get hit. And people are so used to ugly surprises like the retrospective tax and GAR that if you don't get hit, you're sort of relieved. So nobody's got hit. So the household sector has been under pressure because of food inflation and because of various issues about commuting and that sort of thing. So many expected, and that too the BJP is supposed to have a middle class urban bias in its thinking. So there was a sense of disappointment. I think the FM is very much aware of it, but he had to, balance the fiscal deficit 3.5 and rural distress and continuing the infrastructure spending, so I think that was an issue. Not that he didn't agree in principle that the household sector required, and one or two small things in house rent and all have been done, but I agree that's not earth-shaking. Strangely enough, the corporate sector wasn't too happy too. We recognize that these are legitimate concerns.
The FM could have been a little more aggressive in these areas.
In these areas, but then, there is a global headwind all around, and it's difficult to budget. I think on the balance, we'll say it is all delayed but not denied.
Interesting. So you have also been a very prolific sort of investment banker in your formative years and before you sort of got into the active role of public policy. So if you were to give me like 3 to 4 sectors which will sort of really largely benefit from the budget, what would those be in terms of, a stock market impact that we could see in the following days?
I think a very big beneficiary is all those sectors which are having products which are sold to the rural areas. Straight away, I see a very significant movement of wealth in the next 6 to 8 months. That will include FMCG, two-wheelers, tractors. Assuming a normal monsoon, there could be a big effect because these sectors, a little effect, people spend it. In the rural areas, if we get their money, they spend it. That's one thing. I think all those companies which are involved in some sort of activity connected with contracting or supply for infrastructure for the railways or for the other types of infrastructure will benefit tremendously, not only because of the huge outlay that the government is doing, but also because of certain statements that there's going to be a quick redressal mechanism where the projects are stuck. It talked about 80 projects being stuck, so quickly having some rebidding and that sort of a workout situation. So I think a very focused approach to workouts in this thing. So these two sectors, the FMCG, the tractors, the two-wheelers, and then again the contracting companies, the cement companies which have been seeing some excess capacity may find it because there's no import threat there. So these are very, very direct beneficiaries. Rest would probably, benefit as the economy grows.
Okay, so talking about this entire startup India and the government's huge sort of impetus to startups and VCs and PE funds managers, so to say, how will that sort of play out for the guys with a long-term institutional investor into the country? What is your view on them?
One specific bottleneck regarding rates has been removed. Now there is a total pass-through, even in the trust structure. Rates, people are delighted. I'm also delighted because the real estate development segment in India, the developer side is in shambles. There is absolutely no money going to that system because banks are been bitten so hard, and so some risk capital has to go into it. And rates as real estate investment trusts are the only ones I feel. So I think when you look at the startup, of course, this is not really a startup, but then this AIF which is going. Second is that there is another interesting thing which Mr. Jaitley has done. It is to reduce the duration of long-term capital gains on non-listed shares to 2 years.
To 2 years.
There's been a demand from the fraternity because most of the activity is in unlisted stocks and exits are happening. And apart from the big guys like the Blackstones and the Carlyles, a lot of angel investing is taking place in India. Crowdfunding is taking place. All the domestic HNIs putting in 50 lakhs, 1 crore, etc. For them, this will be a great boon because that holding period has come down, and they could at least, investment banks could shift their holding to somebody else and that sort of thing. So I think, and also some sort of cozy statements about getting companies listed in a day, and some statements are at least to increase the feel-good factor because you ask any startup guy, the ease of doing business is one of the big things, because he doesn't have a big paraphernalia as large companies have. He's a one-man show, doing his everything, you know. So, but having said that, startups need a lot more of encouragement, I feel.
So you sort of started this entire discussion on the fact, on the premise that, you know, how big bang can this government really be in the current political scenario and climate? So what is your view there? You know, how aggressive should a government really be? And are you sort of really satisfied from a very non-partisan view that is this a way forward? Of course, you know, the government is finding so much opposition in Rajya Sabha in terms of, you know, getting things to be done. So you think that this is the kind of way to take a very measured, balanced view on budget? You think that is the way it should have taken?
I think surely it's being very pragmatic in the sense that if you've got a great agenda, but you're not able to implement it, and you're going to time and again knock your head against a legislative bottleneck, you know, it's not good strategy or good politics. So I think surely this government has a lot of plans, tremendous amount of plans. You know, for example, a lot of people have come and said that insurance is a long-term industry. Life insurance, you write contracts for 40 years, 50 years. How can you have only 49% capital there? A lot of people have come and said that you know, defense is such a technology-driven industry. How do you expect technology to get transferred at 49%? These are all very, very good, valid points. Then multi-brand retail. Many people say that, you know, multi-brand retail will give the consumer a much better choice and reduce this big difference between retail prices and wholesale prices and so on. But then each of these is a time bomb. You know, and not from the point of view of we will lose elections because of this. Not in the term. The opposition would take us over the coals and not allow us. So I think the politics of this, I feel, is wait till you get a workable majority in the Rajya Sabha. You know, otherwise, you know, do whatever is doable. And in the do whatever is doable strategy, I think government's doing a lot on executive action. Executive actions in India are very substantial. For example, the WTO, which in most other countries has to be passed by Parliament, we can approve WTO agreements by executive action. So there are many efforts being done to ensure that good steps are not held up because of Parliament logjam, but to get it done through executive action.
So why is the government so stuck in the sense that they want to be able to do so many things, but they're not being able to do it? And when we speak to these long-term institutional investors who take a 7 to 9 years old bet onto this country, they're now feeling disappointed. I mean, it comes with a lot of promise of big bang and doing so many things, but things are getting stuck at the Rajya Sabha level. Do you think that, you know, what is your message to these kind of long-term institutional investors who will be watching this video?
Well, I think in India, the bark is worse than our bite. At the end of the day, things get done. But by the time people have lost their patience, for example, insurance was taboo once upon a time. Now you're 100% in single brand retail. But then it's unfortunate that these things will have to happen quite slowly. My only thing I can tell foreign investors from whatever 40 odd years I've been dealing with them is that India never goes back on what it does. Perhaps the first time in its entire, after 47, that retrospective tax was about the first time the government said, and we have seen again and again governments run by opposition party sticking to basically the things that were done. So there is a consistency, there is a directional movement. We don't go back and like Russia did when communism went back, or, you know, we don't do that. So we have never, you know, defaulted on any of our international obligations and so forth. So I think we are fair players. But I agree with your implied criticism that it would be much better if we got our act together faster, so that people who have long-term money in mind can come in. Hopefully that sort of feeling will come among all sections of society.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you for talking to us.